Hi everybody, welcome to Hardwood Home Lab. I'm Kyle, and today I'm going to be setting up Headscale with the Headplane WebUI. If you want to see what that looks like, then come check it out. So to kick this project off, I'm going to be creating a virtual machine with a cloud service provider, just like I did with my other Headscale videos. And the reason I'm doing that is because it avoids complications with going over things like port forwarding, because it's different on every router that's out there. And it also avoids any complications that might arise if your internet service provider is putting you behind CGNAT. If you want to avoid the cost of hosting Headscale on a VPS provider, you can absolutely do that. You'll have to set up dynamic DNS, unless you've got a static IP address for your home internet. And you'll also have to look up how to do port forwarding for your personal router. Every router is different. Another way you might be able to do this, I haven't tested this out, so maybe it's foolish for me to say anything at all, but Cloudflare tunnels might actually get the job done as well. Since pretty much all of the network traffic between clients is direct, there should be no reason why you wouldn't be able to host it there. Although I've never tried it, so I can't speak to how well that works. Carrying on with what I'm doing today, I'm going to select a region that's fairly close to me. I think Seattle's the closest. I'm going to switch this to Debian since I like Debian. So for what I'm doing today, I'm using a shared CPU with 1 gigabyte of RAM. It's only $5 a month. I think that's a very reasonable price for what we're getting. I'm going to label this one the host name. Now I'm going to give this a really strong root password. It's only going to be usable for a short period of time while I'm setting things up. But before I'm done, it's going to be open to the public internet with the root user available for password authentication, which means it's very vulnerable to attack. So put something very strong in here. And then I'll create Linode. So while this is provisioning, I'm going to need some DNS records that point back to this VPS solution. So I'm just going to copy this IP address right here. I'll switch over to Cloudflare. And under DNS records, I want to create an A record for this host. And it's going to be Headscale. I don't want this proxied. And I'll just paste the IP address in there. So that looks good. I'm going to save that. Go back over here. I'll copy the IPv6. Add a quadruple A record. This one's also going to be HS for Headscale. Paste that in here. And I do not want that proxied. So we're going to need those records in place before we spin up the Headscale instance with the reverse proxy. I'm using traffic for that. That way we'll be able to authenticate our records and get our SSL certificate. So if I switch back over here, it looks like we are running. I'm going to copy this SSH access line, and then I'm going to switch over to my terminal. All right, now I'm SSH'd into that VPS server. And you can see I'm signed in as the root user. I want to disable the root user to try and somewhat secure this Headscale instance. So I'm going to create a new user. I'm going to use the command add user, Hardwood Home Lab, new password. You don't need to add in any of this stuff. And that should have created a home directory for me, so I'll see, and it did. Now I want to make sure that that user has sudo privileges, so I'm going to use the command usermod, lowercase a, capital G, sudo, and then the username. Now in preparation of disabling the root user, I want to switch over to my local terminal, and in here I'm going to run the command ssh copy ID, and then I'm going to paste in the IP address of that VPS system. Now this should work because my username is the same on this system as it is on the VPS, but if you had a different username on there, you would put the user there and then an @ symbol before the IP. Since my users are the same, I don't need that on here. This should work. It's asking me for the password, and it shows that it's added the key. So I'll switch back over to the VPS terminal. On here, I just want to verify that that key was copied. So I'm just going to cat out home, hardwoodhomelab.ssh, authorized keys, and it looks like it was copied successfully. While I'm still under the root user, I'm just going to edit the SSH config just to make sure that it is a little more locked down. So I'm going to run vim etc ssh sshd config. Under here, I want to change permit root login to no and password authentication to no. With those two changes done, our SSH service will be infinitely more secure. So I will write and quit. And then I want to restart the SSH service to make sure that the new configuration is loaded. Now that my SSH service has been secured a little bit, I'm going to test it out. So I'm back on my local terminal and I'll run SSH. I'll just paste that IP address in there and I'm in. Now I just want to make sure that my sudo privileges were successful. So I'm going to run sudo apt update. And looks like that worked. All right, so I'm just gonna update this real quick. Now that I've updated all the packages on this Debian virtual machine, I'm going to disable the root user just to make it a little more secure. And to do that, I'm gonna run sudo passwd -l to lock the user out for root. So what that's going to do is disable root login via the terminal without disabling any sudo functionality. Now that this virtual machine has been secured, at least enough for me, I want to change the host name on here. So I'm going to use sudo hostname ctl hostname, and I want to call this one the domain that I'm going to give it. Now that I've run that command, it shows still localhost on the terminal, but that should have changed the host name under the hood. I'm going to cat out the etc hostname file and see that it showed up in there, and it did. So just because I can be a little bit ADHD, I'm going to sign out and sign back in so that I don't have to see localhost anymore, and then I'll carry on with the process. All right, now it shows HS for Headscale on there, and I am happy enough with that. The next step is going to be installing Docker. And Docker has a lovely one-line install script, so I'm going to run that. Now the Docker's installed, I want to add my user to the Docker group so that I don't have to use sudo to run every command. So I'll run sudo usermod a capital G Docker, and I'll add that to the Hardwood Home Lab account. Now in order to enable that new Docker group for my user, I can either sign out or sign back in, or I can use the command new group Docker. Now if I want to run any Docker commands, for example Docker hello world, Docker run hello world, it works without using sudo. Now, in order to make this a quick and easy deployment, I created a GitHub repository that has a compose file and a couple of configs in here. So I'm just going to copy the URL to clipboard, and on here I'll run git clone. I'll paste that repository URL, and that should copy everything in here. And it's in place, so I'm just going to change into that directory. In here there's a couple things we want to change. I'm going to go into the configs directory, and under here I'm going to start with the Headplane one. I'm going to change that config file. In here you want to change your cookie secret, and it's very explicit in the comments to use something that is 32 characters long. Make sure your cookie secret is 32 random characters. I would highly recommend using a password generator for this. I've gone with something that is super secure here, and it's almost impossible to guess. And the other thing you're going to want to change in here is your public URL. This is going to be the domain that you're using for your Headscale instance. So make sure that this matches what you've got your DNS records for. And those should be the only two changes you need to do in this document. If you're wondering why we've got Headscale here with a :8080, this is just using the Docker networking to be able to contact the Headscale instance from Headplane. So you do not want to change that line. Anyway, those are the changes I need in here, so I'll write and quit. So now that I'm done with that, I want to switch back into the Headscale config file, and I'm going to make a change there. Oops. In here, the only thing you really need to change is your server URL. Once again, this is just going to be the domain that you set your DNS for. So with that one change, I'll write and quit. Then we're going to go back to the top level directory. In here, we've got a couple changes we've got to make in the compose file. In here, there's going to be a couple things you want to change. Number one, you'll want to change your time zone environment variable to whatever's appropriate for you. And then down here in the traffic labels, you can see I've got a dummy URL in here. This dummy domain is in here a couple of times, so I'm just going to swap them both at once using vim commands. So this is one of the things that I really love about Vim. I'll explain this command for anybody who doesn't really understand what's going on, but the colon gets me into command mode. The %s means I'm going to be swapping whatever's between these two slashes with whatever's between these two slashes, and the G at the end means global, so it's going to do it throughout the entire document. And that quickly, I've changed out all the dummy domains within this document. Boy, I felt like Dr. Seuss there. But those aren't the only things we need to change. Going down further to the traffic section of this Docker Compose file, there's a couple other changes I want to make. One is just a temporary thing. I want to get rid of this comment. What that's going to do is grab a certificate from the Acme Staging Authority. It's a good idea to start these containers with that comment removed in case, say, for example, your DNS settings haven't propagated and you can't get your certificate. If you try to grab your SSL certificate too many times, you can actually be banned from using the Let's Encrypt service for a period of time. I'm not even sure how long it is. So it's a good idea to try and test with the staging authority, and when that works, then switch over to the actual certificate authority. And then the last thing you want to do is change your email in here to whatever Let's Encrypt is going to be able to contact you at. Now with those few changes done, I'm ready to start up this container. To do that, I'll run the command docker compose up -d. Now I should have access to Headplane, so I'm going to switch over to my browser again. I'm going to open a new window, and we'll go to hs.hardwoodhomelabdemo.xyz, and you have to have admin at the end of that. Excellent. So this is what we wanted to see. That's because we're using the staging authority from Let's Encrypt and not the actual authorized certificate authority. So I'm just going to go continue to site. We'll say advanced, proceed. Awesome. We can see that Headplane is running and it says not secure here. So we're going to take a look at the certificate details. So in here we got a certificate from the Riddling Rhubarb common name of Let's Encrypt. So since we grabbed a Let's Encrypt certificate, we know that our DNS is propagated as needed. We are now set up to grab an authorized certificate from Let's Encrypt. So let's do that quickly before I carry on. I'm back here in my terminal. I'm just going to shut down those containers that I started. Then in order for us to get an authorized certificate, I'm going to have to remove the certificate that we got from the staging authority. And that was under the Let's Encrypt directory in here. So I'm going to cd into that. You can see that acme.json file is our certificate, so I'm going to remove that. And that's owned by root, so I'm going to have to use sudo with that. And then back up to the root directory, I'm going to change that Docker compose file. In here, I'm going to scroll down to that line where I set up the staging authority usage. And I'm going to comment that out again. So we'll write and quit. And then I can start the containers back up. All right, I had to open up a new browser window so that it would reload the new certificate, but now it comes up without any warning and it is showing that our connection is secure. We're now ready to start using Headscale and Headplane. So in order to sign into Headplane, we're going to need an API key from Headscale. You'll notice the single sign-on button on the bottom. This is a service that uses OIDC, or Open Identification Connect. If you are familiar with it, you might find that worthwhile setting up. For this video, I'm just going to stick to the API key. And in order to get that, I'm just going to switch over to my terminal again. In here, we're going to run a Docker command, and that's docker exec it headscale. Now, so far what I've typed is it's going to run a command on the terminal inside the Headscale container, and inside that I want to run the command Headscale API key create. And it spits out this API key. This one string of characters is what's going to give you control of your Headscale instance. So keep it secret, keep it safe. I'm going to copy that, switch back over to my browser, and in here I'm going to paste that API key and sign in. So this is kind of the get started page for Headplane. It gives you a single line install script for Tailscale on any Linux devices, and download links for basically any other device that you might have. So to show you how this works, I'm going to switch over to my mom's computer and install Tailscale. I'll be right back. Alright, so I'm signed into mom's computer here, and I'm going to open up a terminal. And here I'm just going to paste in that single line install script that I just grabbed from the Headplane site. I'll give mom's password, and just like that, Tailscale is installed. So back on the Headplane site, that's what this page is all about, is just how to install Tailscale. So I'm going to click, I already know what I'm doing. So now that we're into the Headplane interface, this is where Headplane becomes valuable. It's got settings for machines, users, access control, DNS, and settings. And basically the only thing that's in settings are preauth keys, which I'll show you in just a little bit. But to get started, we're going to need some users, because if you don't have users, you can't connect a node. So I'm going to add a new user. I'm going to start with mom. It does ask for a display name and email address, but you don't need to put any of that in. So it was really quick and easy to add users, and now that I've got them all on here, we're ready to start adding some machines. So if you go to the Machines tab, you click on Add Device, there's two ways to add a machine. You can register the machine key by using a Tailscale up command that just points to this Headscale instance, or you can generate a preauth key, which you can see took us to the Settings tab, and on here we've got Manage Auth Keys and Manage Restrictions. The restrictions is only for OIDC support, so once again, it's not something I'm covering in this video, but we can add auth keys in here. I'll do that for dad, but just to show how it works for just adding a machine key, I'm going to do that for mom. And it gives you the Tailscale up command that you want to use. So I'm just going to copy that. We'll select user mom. And I've pasted that tailscale up command in mom's terminal. I'm going to run that. And then I'm going to run it again with sudo. And what it gives us for output here is a link to our Headscale server. I'll click on that just to see where it brings us. And in here it just gives us a command to run on Headscale to register this machine ID. In fact, that was part of the URL right here. So if we copy that and I paste that machine key in here, when I click confirm, it should add that machine. So just like that, mom has joined the Tailnet. She's the only node on here so far. If we scroll down, you can see it has all of our Tailscale settings. And if you take a look, the domain shows popos.example.com and the machine name is popos. That's because that is the OS that's running on her machine. And it's a little too generic. So I'll show you another great thing that you can do with Headplane. If I click on machine settings, we can edit the machine name right here. And I'm just going to call this one mom. We'll confirm it. And now all of mom's settings have changed in the Tailnet that fast. Tailnet with only one device is not very good. So let's add another one on here. Let's add dad's system to the Tailnet. I'm going to go to settings and I'm going to use a preauth key for his. So I'm going to create a preauth key. This one will be for dad. It's going to expire in 90 days. You can change this to whatever you like. It's not going to be reusable because I'm just going to use it for one device. If you were going to add more than one device, clicking on this reusable would be convenient, so you only have to generate one key, and then when the key expires, they will still be connected to the Tailnet and authenticated, but nobody else will be able to use the key anymore. And then, of course, with an ephemeral device, it's very clearly laid out here. Devices authenticated with this key will be automatically removed once they go offline. So when you use an ephemeral key, say you need to share a file with a friend from your personal NAS, you could add them with an ephemeral key. They could connect, get the file that you needed to share, and then once they've disconnected, they cannot use that key anymore. For this instance, I'm going to just leave them all on the default settings, and I'll click confirm, and that generates the key for dad to use. And then, of course, down here, we've got the tailscale up command that will authenticate while it's connecting. So I'm just going to copy that command. So I'm signed into dad's computer now. I've just installed Tailscale, and I'm going to paste that join command from the Headplane server. And I'll remember to put sudo first. I'll paste that line in, and it should be connected. And when I switch back to my browser, if I go to the machines, dad is now on there. Also, it shows it as popos, so I'm going to just change the machine name on that as well. And that's basically how you get machines to join your Tailnet. So I'm going to do this for Bob and Doug off camera, and then when I'm done that, I'll come back and show you some more features of Headplane. All right, now that I've got all the machines connected to the Tailnet, I'll show you my favorite feature of Headplane, and it is this DNS tab. In here, you've got all the DNS settings you could possibly want. You've got the Tailnet name for Magic DNS. In the config file for Headscale, it was set at example.com, so that's what we've got here. And we can rename it actually right from within this interface. You can change the name servers that you want to use while you're on the Tailnet. You can add DNS records and set custom DNS search domains for your Tailnet. You can also disable Magic DNS, but I wouldn't do that because it is one of the best features of Tailscale. So to kind of show you how this works, I'm going to switch over to mom's computer. So here I am on mom's computer, and in here, she can actually access anybody else on the Tailnet. So I'm going to ping dad, for example, and she can ping dad just fine. That's because I've changed dad's machine name to dad. She can also ping Bob. She can ping Doug. She can ping Doug. All of these machines are connected as if they are on the same subnet. Now I'll show you why Magic DNS is a wonderful thing. So if I go to a web browser and I look on here for just Bob, I will get a Google search for Bob. I can't access the web server that Bob has on his host machine without putting in an actual domain. So I'm going to put that into bob.example.com. And you can see we've accessed Bob's web server. So this is kind of what makes Magic DNS magic. So on Headplane, we can actually rename that tailnet. So I'm going to do that right here. Let's say that I wanted this to be gamers.local, and it will change that setting. And as you can see here, it is done. So that's a great feature. You can change your tailnet name from right within the GUI, and you can change it to whatever you want. Just don't use legitimate websites. That might cause confusion. So this name services section is really bloody cool. The name servers that are defaulted on here, I believe, are the Cloudflare name servers, but you can add any DNS server that you want. So you can click on Add Name Server. It can even be within your local subnet. Like for example here where I've got 192.168.1.1, that's typically what you would see for a home router. And you could bounce all your DNS queries back to your home router if you wanted to. In order for this to work, of course, you would have to have ACL rules that would allow it. Or right now, since I have no ACL rules, everything is allowed. But my favorite part of this is split DNS right here. So let's say, for example, that you've got a domain that you've purchased. You're using it on several machines within your home lab, and you've got a local DNS server that points to these local machines. It's fine for when you're within your home, but once you leave, you can't use that DNS anymore. Well, if you add it onto here, you can actually split your DNS so that only any requests that are on this domain get forwarded to your own name server, and anything else will get forwarded to the global name servers. Pretty cool. So if you're someone like me that uses an ad blocking DNS service like Pi-hole or AdGuard Home, you can actually add them within the name servers section on here, and you can block ads from anywhere. And of course you can add your own DNS records in here. If you remember, I changed the tailnet name to gamers.local. So I'm going to add a DNS record on here for bob.example.local. So that's a whole new one. And we'll point this to Bob's Tailnet IP. We'll confirm that. If I switch back over to Mom's computer, if I go to bob.example.local, I can still access Bob's website, just with a custom DNS entry. Now down here, the search domains section is not something I've ever used before, but if I understood the documentation correctly, this could be extremely useful in conjunction with a split DNS name server up here. So for example, if you've got a split DNS server that up here that is just for yourdomain.com, then you could add a search domain down here for yourdomain.com. Add. Then if you've got a host set up at gameserver.yourdomain.com, you would be able to ping gameserver, and the search domain would look for gameserver.gamers.local. And if it didn't find it in there, then it would go through gameserver.yourdomain.com, and you wouldn't have to type out the full domain. Not something I've ever used, but I could see its usefulness. Now the last tab I need to cover in Headplane is the access control area, and in my opinion this is the most important feature of Headplane. This area effectively allows you to create firewall rules between all the devices that are connected in your tailnet. Now before I started recording, I created one, and I'll kind of go over it to show you how this works. But if you've seen my standalone Headscale video where I had an ACL file that had all the policies in it, this is effectively the exact same. Up at the top, they've got a couple of links to the Tailscale ACL guide, which gives you some information. It's not exactly the clearest, however. I much prefer the Headscale docs right here, which gives you an example ACL towards the bottom here. This is actually what I use to build my example ACL rules. So I'll just quickly go over this to kind of show you how this works. I've set it up so that I've got two groups in here, a friends group and a family group. Of course, me being my user is in both groups. And you can define as many groups down here as you need. Tag owners. So I haven't really covered that in this video. You can add tags to every node that's joining, and this will allow whatever groups are defined in those tags to be able to use them. If a person is not part of that group and they try to assign that tag to one of their nodes, it won't be allowed. Down here I've got a hosts section. This is where I define the internal DNS in my home network. When I had mentioned that in the DNS section, this is going to be used for the rule that will allow internal DNS to be used. Down here in the ACLs section, these are the actual rules. So you'll notice for every section there is an action of accept. That is the only action that's available, because if it is not defined in here with a rule, it will automatically be denied. So my first section will allow from any source a TCP connection to any node that is tagged as Plex on port 32400. And then down here I've created effectively different subnets, so anyone within the friends group can connect to anyone else in the friends group on any port. Same thing with the family subnet. And then I've got an internal DNS rule that will allow me to connect to my DNS internal on port 53. And then down here at the very bottom, this last section just basically means that any owner can connect to a device that is owned by them. So these ACL rules that I've got in here are probably going to be pretty typical of how I would use it. Let's just say that the needs have changed and Dad now needs access to Bob's web server. So we can give him access to that by adding another rule. I'll give a description of it. This makes things so much easier to keep track of. In here, I'm going to give it some curly brackets just to keep the formatting. I'll give it an action of accept. The source is going to be Dad. Destination is going to be Bob at, and I'm going to give him just port 80. So that should give Dad access to Bob's web server. Now it's important to keep all the punctuation proper for JSON formatting. I have to have a comma down here. If I miss that, it's going to fail saving this. Another neat feature are these preview changes. If you've been working on this document and you're like, I can't remember what I've changed, you can go to the preview changes tab, and if you scroll down, the new lines I've added have been highlighted, and I don't know why that keeps going back to the top. Anyway, I'm going to save this. That's updated the policy. And now Dad should have access to Bob's web server. So with that, I'm going to go back to Mom's system and I'm going to open up a new private window. I'm going to try and connect to Bob's server, which she should no longer have access to. And it cannot access it. But over on Dad's computer, Dad now does have access to Bob's website. So now that our ACL rules are in place, I'll show you another cool feature of Headplane, and that is under the Machines tab again. The reason I did this one out of order is because tag owners need to be in place before you can add tags. You can add ACL tags right from here. So for example, if I want to run tag Plex, I will add that here. And now you can see that tag has been added to Dad, or if Bob had a game server, confirm. So with that feature, you can add tags without having to run your Tailscale up command again from your node. If you accidentally added a node to the wrong user, you can change the owner right from here. So if I wanted to change Mom to me, I can confirm that, and now the Mom node is owned by me. Oh man, and I almost forgot to mention routes. I'm going to run this Tailscale up command on Mom's machine and advertise it as an exit node. Now this isn't actually going to work because IP forwarding is disabled on mom's system right here. So you would have to go through the documentation. It's very clear and shows you how to enable IP forwarding on this particular machine. And also you would have to set up an ACL rule that would allow it. But now that I've got it advertising, at least as an exit node, if I go back to the Headplane website, I refresh the page here, and you can see now this one is requesting to be used as an exit node. We can enable that right here with the route settings, and it's just a simple checkbox. Now the exit node is enabled. If the IP forwarding was working on mom's machine and we had an ACL rule to allow it, we would be able to route all traffic from any nodes on the Tailnet out through mom as an exit node. Of course, it works the same for internal subnet routes. On the video that I did with Headscale and Headscale Admin WebUI, I had a comment that was asking me if we could restrict the WebUI to the Tailnet once it was up. And I said, yeah, that should be doable with traffic labels on the Docker Compose file. I have since realized that that was a stupid comment to make, since that's not going to work. The idea that I had was that you connect your Headscale instance to your Tailnet and then route the traffic through the Tailnet into the WebUI. But that's not going to work, since DNS is going to be working against us. To access the Headscale server, it has to be accessible via a public IP address. And since you'll be accessing it via the public IP address, the traffic's going to go through your public IP address. I came up with two solutions. One is extremely janky. The other one is actually secure. If I go into my Compose file, so I've got two comments on the Docker Compose file here. The top one was if you replaced this line with this line and made sure that the domain that was listed in here was the magic DNS domain within your Tailnet, then you should be able to access the admin panel from this domain within your Tailnet. Of course, you would have to have ACL rules that would allow this to happen. During my testing, when I had no ACL rules, this was working just fine. For some reason now, when I have the ACL rules working, I can't seem to access this, and it hasn't been working while I was recording here. It's not something that I had recommended anyway, which you can clearly see in this line. It is not truly secure. It is just relying on magic DNS within your Tailnet. This could easily be bypassed by setting up a local DNS record and pointing it to the public IP address of your Headscale server. What would be truly secure is actually by using these two labels right here. Now, this is actually what I had recommended in the comment to use, but it's not going to work for the IPs within your Tailnet. What I would recommend doing is replacing this IP address to your public IP address. If you do that, it will make the web client only available to you or your IP specifically. I'm not going to do that for this video because I don't want to expose my public IP address, but I would put that in here, recreate the containers, and then you would have more secure access to your WebUI. So that pretty much covers everything that Headplane can do for controlling Headscale. If you really want to see what Headscale can actually do, you should watch my Headscale standalone video. I cover everything that Headscale and the Tailscale up commands can do. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Kyle, this is Hardwood Home Lab, and I'll see you in the next one.